My name is Aaliyah. I'm 18 years old and I just left the small town where I'd spent my whole life, with nothing but an old canvas bag, a few crumpled bills, and a secret my adoptive parents never imagined I'd already uncovered. On my birthday night, they looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Your real name isn't Aaliyah. Your birth mother was institutionalized." No explanation. No embrace. Just a thin folder shoved into my hands and the words, "Take care of your own life." Have you ever been cut off by the very people who called themselves your family, as if you had never existed? Have you ever been kept from the truth about yourself, left to dig through your past just to understand why you were born? If you have, leave a comment below this video. Tap like if you believe the truth should never be buried. And don't forget to subscribe, because what they didn't know was that I had already opened the door they tried to seal shut for 18 years. And it all started with a small basement hatch beneath the floor, where they thought I'd never look. I don't know what drew me into the garage that night. Maybe it was the insomnia. Maybe it was the echo of my adoptive father's voice still ringing in my ears, cold and steady, when he said that name I'd never heard before, Margaret Sanderson. Or maybe, after 18 years of living under that roof, never truly feeling like I belonged, being thrown out like an expired object left me with nothing to lose. The garage was pitch black, lit only by the faint motion light flickering from the porch, bleeding through the crack in the door. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and moved slowly between old cardboard boxes, dusty furniture, and the old broom cabinet that had always stood there, covered in cobwebs and neglect. But as I nudged it aside to find an outlet, something caught my eye, a narrow rectangular cut in the wooden floor, with a rusted metal handle hidden beneath a worn plastic mat. My heart began pounding. I knelt, brushed away the dust, and pulled up the small wooden hatch. Damp, cool air rose up from below. Inside was a shallow compartment maybe 3 feet deep. Resting in the center was a dull tin box, its lock rusted through, barely hanging on. My hands trembled as I opened it. I couldn't breathe when I saw what was inside. A yellowed birth certificate still intact. The name printed clearly, Aaliyah Sanderson. Mother, Margaret Sanderson. No information about the father. I froze, staring at that name, reading it over and over again like I expected it to change. Next was a small, weathered leather journal frayed along the edges. I flipped through the pages. The handwriting was frantic, uneven, some of it smudged as if written in panic. "They're watching. Don't trust anyone wearing blue or white." I stopped. Blue or white? Police? Nurses? Doctors? A chill ran down my spine. Beneath the notebook was a black and white photograph of a woman being escorted by officers, hands cuffed behind her back, hair a mess, but her eyes stared straight into the camera. Not afraid. Angry. Eyes that looked eerily familiar, like the ones that had stared back at me from mirrors on days I didn't recognize myself. I flipped the photo over. In fading ballpoint pen, Margaret, July 2004, outside Ravenwood. At the bottom of the box was a faded white employee badge, the logo of a research institute barely visible. Ravenwood Neurological Research Institute. The name printed on it, Dr. Margaret Sanderson, Neuroscience Division. I held the card, and the cold plastic seemed to burn into my fingertips, like I was touching a sealed memory no one ever intended to be opened. I sat motionless on the garage floor, the phone light dimly reflecting my face through the badge's plastic sleeve. Something was wrong. Something very big had been buried. The next day I didn't go to school. Instead, I took everything I found to the city library, the only place left with public computers, local newspaper archives, and most importantly, no one who knew who I was. I typed Ravenwood Neurological Research Institute into the search bar. Almost nothing came up. Just a few scattered articles, mostly dry medical reports from the early 2000s. But after 2005, the institute's name vanished from every system, like it never existed. I moved to the archived print section. The microfilm scanner worked slowly. I flipped page after page, headline after headline, until I stopped at one line. Neuroscientists suspended amid allegations of patient manipulation. Ravenwood project under scrutiny. Published, August 2004. I zoomed in on the accompanying photo. It was her. The woman from the basement photo. Margaret Sanderson. My mother. The article explained that Dr. Margaret was once the lead researcher at Ravenwood, specializing in memory restoration and neural trauma treatment. But after filing internal complaints about unethical experiments at the institute, she was suspended. 1 month later, she was detained for behavioral instability and security threats to research. Declared mentally unfit and transferred to a private facility called Ravenhill, where only family and legal counsel were allowed contact. No follow-up. No trial records. Just one chilling final sentence. Records permanently sealed under Federal Medical Protection Clause 7B. I leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. My mother didn't disappear. She was erased. That night, back at the motel, I opened the journal again. On the last page in sharp red ink was a message. Sloppier than the rest but unmistakably clear. If you're reading this, it means they haven't succeeded. I closed the book and looked around the cramped motel room. I'd never truly known who I was. But now I knew one thing for certain. Someone had worked very hard to make sure I never found out. And what scared me most was how well they'd done it for 18 years. I switched on the bedside lamp, spread all the documents, photos, and the ID card across the bed, and snapped pictures of each one with my phone. Every detail wasn't just a clue, it was a key. A map leading me to the only place that could answer the question I'd carried all my life. What really happened to my mother? And why had she been silenced? I went back to the library the next morning, sat in the same corner. But I didn't search for Ravenwood. I searched for government investigations into medical facilities closed due to ethics violations. I searched for detentions without trial. I searched for the phrase Project Mantis, which I had seen faintly printed on the back of the ID card. An anonymous post on an old medical forum immediately caught my attention. Mantis equals behavioral control via hippocampal electrode stimulation. Ravenwood was just the beginning. Everyone who knows has been silenced. Below it, a string of deleted comments, except one message remained. If you're with Margaret, go to District 12 archives. Everything she wrote was backed up there. But be careful. They're still watching. I froze. District 12 archives was in southern Springfield, Missouri, almost 700 miles away. I had no car, no money, no support, but I had a name, file, and a reason not to turn back. What looked like just an old storage hatch turned out to be a door to an entire world I never imagined. And I was about to walk straight into it. No map, no guide, but I felt I was walking my own path. I left town just as dawn brushed against the old rooftops. No goodbyes, no farewells. On the southbound bus, I sat by the window, pressing my forehead to the cool glass and staring out across empty country roads and fields that once felt like home, where I used to believe I'd live a quiet, simple, safe life. But all I had now was an old canvas bag, a dying phone, and a few $100s my adoptive parents tossed at me like hush money for their guilt. I arrived in a small town about 3 hours from Springfield. I couldn't enter the city yet, partly because I was afraid of being tracked, partly because I needed time to plan. I found a room at a rundown inn buried in an old neighborhood where the scent of mildew and bleach clung to every blanket and pillow. The room was barely 160 square feet, with a creaky bed, a chipped sink, and a wall-mounted TV that had long lost its remote. For the first 3 days, I didn't step outside except to buy instant noodles and canned soup. I pried open the soup lids with a key, poured it into paper cups, and drank it cold, eating while searching on my phone the phrases I had memorized by heart. Ravenwood, Margaret Sanderson, Project Mantis, District 12 archives. But the more I searched, the more I hit dead ends. Everything seemed wiped from the public web. Pages that once linked to something were now blank or redirected to error 404s. Old comments on outdated medical blogs were cut off mid-sentence, with no author info left behind. Every night, I'd turn on the dim light next to the bed, pull up each photo I had taken of the documents from the basement box, and zoom in on every detail. Sometimes I would just stare at the photo of my mother in handcuffs, wondering if she had looked into that camera, hoping that one day her lost daughter would see it and understand she never abandoned me. She simply didn't have a choice. On the 4th day, I scrolled through an old forum once used by neuroscience students. One post, almost 15 years old, from an inactive anonymous account stopped me cold. Just a single line, no title. If you want to find the truth, look in District 12 archive, but don't leave a trace. That sentence stabbed straight into my chest. I read it over and over again, word by word. District 12. Not a street. Not a small office. It was a federal data storage facility, originally built to safeguard medical records, research logs, and sealed reports from the 1980s through the early 2000s. I quickly pulled up a map. The location was listed as Springfield, Missouri, an old administrative area near the state university. The archive no longer served the public but still existed as a back-end division, where government agencies sent special requests to access sealed records. I closed the phone, opened my notebook, and started mapping out a route. I didn't have a car. No one to help. I couldn't use public apps like Uber because any digital trace could be tracked. I had to rely on myself. That afternoon, I walked to a laundromat 2 blocks from the motel and spotted an old paper map pinned to the public bulletin board. A few local ads were taped around it, missing pet flyers, a couple of handwritten roommate searches. I gently removed the map, folded it, and tucked it into my coat pocket. Back in my room, I used my phone to look up local and intercity bus routes. There was one Greyhound leaving town at 6 in the morning, arriving in Springfield just after noon. The ticket wasn't expensive, but just enough to drain what little I had left after 3 days of noodles and paying for the room. I bought the ticket directly at the station to avoid leaving an online footprint. When the clerk asked for my name, I hesitated for a moment before answering. Allison. Allison Moore. She wrote it down without question. That was the first time I said a name that wasn't mine, but somehow it felt safer. That night, I packed up everything in my bag. I kept only a few clothes, a water bottle, some cash, and the small notebook containing everything I knew: photos, birth certificate, scanned documents, notes about Ravenwood, the address for District 12. I added a small slip of paper inside my coat pocket. If something happens to me, send everything to journalist Simone Carter, Boston. I didn't know why I wrote her name. I had once read an investigative piece she published about abuse in a nursing home a few years back. That article had led to the mayor's resignation and a full-scale investigation. I remembered the look on the elderly woman's face in the photo that came with it, exhausted but burning with truth. Maybe I believed Simone was someone who wouldn't stay silent if she read my story. The next morning, I boarded the bus before the sun was up. On board, I sat by the window, clutching my bag tight against me. I didn't know if someone was following me. Everything I had read about Ravenwood made my skin crawl. No one who spoke up had lasted long. Those who did often vanished, got committed to psych wards, or suddenly changed names and disappeared from public life. I didn't dare use my phone. Didn't take pictures. Didn't check emails. I just sat quietly watching the highway pass like chapters flipping too fast to ever return. By midday, the bus stopped at the Southern Transfer Station in Springfield. I stepped off into thick, dusty air. I looked around. This wasn't a city like New York or Chicago. Everything here had a quiet, faded look. Low buildings, weathered signs, slow-moving cars. I pulled my bag along, merged into the flow of people, then turned onto a small road heading west, where the District 12 archive was marked on my map. When I reached it, what stood before me didn't look like a modern data center. It was a 3-story red brick building with a sloped roof and long windows covered in iron mesh. The main door was locked with a small notice posted. Appointments only. Government authorized personnel. I stood there, heart pounding. I had no appointment. I wasn't government. I was just a girl with a stolen name and a mother buried in the system. But I had made it this far. And I couldn't turn back. It took me 3 days to figure out how to access the restricted archive section of District 12. That old building wasn't just monitored by grainy cameras and a basic badge scanner like its appearance suggested. Inside was a maze of bureaucratic procedures, tight-lipped office workers, and a thick steel door on the second floor that read, "Restricted access, clearance level 4 required." I had no badge. No name on any list. And definitely no federal authorization. But I had something else. A forged profile I created using a library printer and a fabricated student credential from a small university in Iowa, stating I was a medical history research student. It wasn't perfect. But after living on the edge for days, I had learned one rule. If you walk slow enough, look confident enough, and never pause when people glance your way, sometimes you can walk right past a locked door like you belong there. On Wednesday morning, I arrived early, wearing a dark khaki coat, non-prescription glasses, and carrying a document case. I followed behind a group of staff scanning in, quietly trailing them into the first-floor elevator. No one asked me anything. I rode up to the second floor, headed straight to the reception desk for the internal archive section. The woman behind the counter had silver blonde hair and the bored expression of someone who had worked that job for far too long. I smiled gently and spoke in a calm voice. I'm from Midwestern University, conducting research on early 2000s medical sponsorship programs. Is there anyone who can assist me with accessing records related to the Safe Family Initiative? She looked up, peering at me through her tortoiseshell glasses. What program? Safe Family Initiative, I repeated. It was associated with the Health Security Agency. I'm looking for documentation on custody transfer cases involving unclear biological parentage. She frowned, sighed, then turned in her chair to pull out a registration log. Do you have approval paperwork? I do, but it was submitted electronically. My school said it would go directly to Mr. Ferguson in records management. She raised an eyebrow, then sighed again, flipping through the log. Finally, she grabbed a folder and slid it toward me. You've got 45 minutes. No phones, no pictures, no recordings. And if you don't understand something, don't ask me. I nodded, thanked her, and made my way to the reading room. Inside were tall metal shelving units reaching the ceiling, with the stale smell of old paper and vinyl seeping from every corner. I opened the folder she gave me and scanned through the document index under the relevant code for medical guardianship. Each entry was coded and filed under initials. I flipped to this section and felt my breath catch. Sanderson M. Case 7128, Class Omega, sealed. No description. No summary. Just a retrieval code and a red stamp. Restricted. I returned to the search terminal, found the drawer number listed. Drawer 74, back of aisle 4. I pulled it gently, the metal groaned. Inside was a single file packet, enclosed in a sealed envelope. I pulled it out, sat at the desk, and carefully opened the cover. The first page was a psychiatric assessment, dated July 14, 2004. Subject: Dr. Margaret Sanderson, Ph.D. in Neuroscience, Ravenwood Institute. Evaluator: Dr. Pierce, Head of Medical Ethics Review. I froze. Name. I had seen it before. He was listed in an old article as a senior Ravenwood staff member. But according to that same article, Pierce left Ravenwood in 2002. So why was he evaluating my mother in 2004? I turned to the next page, a transcript from a video recording. My hands trembled as I began to read. Tape 03. Extracted from the Raven Hill Assessment Room. Duration: 2 minutes and 48 seconds. Patient condition: alert, stable cognition. Assessor's notes: no clear signs of delusions at this time. Margaret Sanderson states, I'm not crazy. I know what they're doing. They implant devices into patients' brains. I've seen the blueprints. I was once part of the research board. I filed reports to my superiors. Then they labeled me a psychiatric risk and locked me up here. I swallowed hard, feeling my head spin. It felt like I was hearing her voice, deep, clear, steady, not trembling or agitated. My mother wasn't panicked like the medical records described. She spoke with reason, order, and most importantly, she was warning. Beneath the transcript was a bold, dark red line. Emergency guardianship transfer. Subject: Aaliyah Sanderson. Safe Family Initiative Program. Data encryption. Class Omega. I stopped. That was my name. My real name. On official documents. I carefully read the content below. It was a decision transferring guardianship from biological mother Margaret Sanderson to a special care unit, sponsored by the Health Security Agency, citing the risk of an unsafe mental environment for child development. Below was a note. Biological mother classified as mentally unstable, exhibiting signs of organizational resistance. Proposed transfer of child to a couple vetted by security and with backgrounds suitable for rehabilitation program. Location and identities undisclosed. Internal code stamped. No outside access permitted. Security level: Class Omega. File permanently sealed. I couldn't hold back tears. I am not an abandoned child. I am not a burden taken in out of charity. I am a child taken away, hidden, erased as if my existence were part of an experiment requiring absolute control. Just as I was about to photograph the pages with my phone, heavy footsteps echoed outside the records room. My heart skipped. Someone was coming. I stuffed the files back into the envelope, placed it in the drawer as before, then stepped back toward the window at the rear. The door swung open. A man in a security uniform entered, eyes scanning the room. "What are you doing here?" His voice was stern. I panicked. I'm reviewing assigned records." "Show your ID." I fumbled through my pocket. The fake student ID I carried had gotten wet earlier and the printing was smudged. He frowned. "Come with me." I turned to look for an escape route when suddenly a hand gently tapped my shoulder from behind a filing cabinet. I jumped and turned around. A middle-aged man in a long black coat and a baseball cap looked at me with a warning gaze. "Follow me. Don't say a word." I don't know why I obeyed. But in that moment, I knew if I stayed even a few more minutes, I'd never get out with the truth I had just found. The man led me through a narrow passage behind the filing cabinets, up an old emergency stairwell, and out a small side door on the building's flank. When we reached the empty parking lot behind the building, he finally spoke, his voice low and clear. "You've looked too deep into what they've tried to bury for 2 decades. If you want to survive, listen carefully to every word I'm about to say." I gasped for breath as I followed the man in the black coat out the side door to the back parking lot. The cold wind brushed my collar and the concrete pavement underfoot seemed to pull me back to reality, but my heart still raced after what I had just read. The man didn't look back at me, only walked steadily and decisively toward a dusty silver-gray pickup truck parked in a far corner, covered with a thick layer of dirt as if it had been there for a long time. Once inside the truck, he pulled the key, started the engine, and stared straight ahead without speaking for several minutes. I glanced sideways, only seeing a hardened jawline and a sharp nose shadowed by the faint light filtering through the windshield. "I'm Caleb Monroe," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "I worked at Ravenwood for nearly 8 years, responsible for storage systems and data security. Margaret was someone I deeply respected. And believe me, what you just read today is only the surface." I said nothing, gripping my jacket tightly. Hearing someone finally say my mother's name seriously, without ridicule or the label "mentally unstable," choked my throat. I nodded slightly as if to confirm my presence in this very moment. "Margaret wasn't just a good doctor," he continued. "She was the only one at Ravenwood brave enough to question Project Mantis. The project that, according to management, aimed to help patients recover neurological function after severe psychological trauma. But what they didn't say was how they did it." Caleb pulled a small silver object from his inner jacket pocket, a pea-sized chip enclosed in a plastic lens. "They implanted this into people's brains," he said, placing it in my hand. "Into the hippocampus, the part that controls memory and emotion. They called it the emotion stabilizer device. But in reality, it was a control tool." I stared at the tiny object, a cold shiver running down my spine. "Who allowed this to happen?" "No one," he answered. "And that's why Margaret wanted to stop it. She found that some patients never consented. Some were homeless women, others were inpatients, transferred under special cases. All records were doctored." Caleb paused and looked at me. His dark eyes held no anger, only the exhaustion of years of silence. "When she filed internal reports, I was ordered to delete all data from the servers. But I didn't. I copied it. I couldn't destroy justice like that." I looked at him, unable to believe my ears. "So, you kept the evidence?" He nodded, then bent down to the passenger seat and pulled out a small metal box, placing it in my lap. I opened it. Inside was an old external hard drive, scratched and worn, with a small note taped on it. "Mantis V3, double encryption, unlock by facial recognition or handwritten passcode." "Inside are patient files," Caleb said. "Funding lists from at least 3 major pharmaceutical corporations. Minutes from internal meetings. And a video, never released before. You need to see it. It will make every piece fit." I carefully closed the box, still feeling like I was holding a ticking bomb. "Why come forward now?" Caleb took a deep breath, then answered slowly, "Because you're Margaret's daughter. And because I promised her, if one day you returned, I wouldn't let you walk away into the darkness your mother endured." I turned away, tears starting to spill from my eyes. I didn't want to cry, not now. But the feeling of being acknowledged, not as a subject to monitor or target to control, but as a real human being, was something I'd never had in 18 years. "Can I ask," I hesitated. About my father? I never found any documents mentioning him. Caleb fell silent. Margaret never spoke clearly. But I saw a name in the system under genetic source. Someone on Ravenwood's advisory board. They only signed with initials, LP. L.P. Is Landon Pierce? I whispered. Caleb nodded slowly. I felt the air around me thicken like something was pressing down on my chest. Landon Pierce, the name I had seen signed on my mother's assessment files. A man who was once a psychologist, later becoming the top executive of the organization behind Ravenwood. If he truly was the one who helped separate me from my mother, and even more than that, was my biological father. No one can choose where they're born, Caleb said as if reading my thoughts. But you can choose the path you take from here. And that path won't be easy. I pressed my lips together. I don't need easy. I need the truth. Caleb was silent for a moment, then opened the truck door. Let's go. It's not safe here any longer. I climbed out with him, clutching the hard drive to my chest like a fragile piece of life just revived. The lead gray sky cast shadows over the oil-stained parking lot, and inside me there was not fear, but awakening. My mother risked everything for this. And now, it was my turn. I sat in the shadowy corner of a 24-hour diner right off the old highway, my back against the wall, eyes fixed on the laptop Caleb had just handed me along with the hard drive. The screen was faded and the scratches on the frame showed it had been someone's constant companion through many journeys, more than I'd been on. I waited until the place emptied out, leaving only a young bartender washing glasses behind the counter and a man dozing off near the door. The rain drummed against the tin roof, making the diner's atmosphere fragmented, as if the whole outside world was trapped behind the glass. I put on headphones, plugged the hard drive into the USB port, and opened the folder named EV, Final Archive. Inside were a series of encrypted subfolders, but one video was not hidden, marked only as V07, Subject Sanderson, 2004. I was unprepared for what I was about to see, even though I had always known that the truth would never come gently. I hit play. The frame showed a small room, cold fluorescent lighting, bare walls, and a metal table with 2 chairs. Margaret, my mother, sat in one of them, wrists cuffed with soft restraints, her lab coat collar torn, hair messy, sweat glistening on her forehead. Though thin and frail, her eyes burned with something fierce and unextinguished. Will. A man's voice outside the frame spoke, deep and steady like someone used to control. Patient 7128. Day 14 Post-cognitive recalibration procedure. Today we will continue memory orientation therapy. Dosage, 3.4 milligrams. Prepare injection. I saw her flinch, but she did not scream or struggle. A nurse, face blurred in the corner of the shot, stepped forward and injected a syringe into her arm. Seconds later, her body trembled lightly, eyelids drooped. But then, as if a deep part inside her refused to be extinguished, she opened her eyes, gasped, and shouted. They implant devices into homeless women. I remember everything. Every face, every room, every fragment of memory you tried to erase. I wrote reports. I sent them. The voice outside paused for a few seconds. There was the steady tapping of a pen on the metal table. Margaret. The deep male voice continued, slower, as if testing a psychological manipulation technique. You agreed to the project. You coordinated the research team. What made you turn against it? At first I believed in medical ethics, she growled. I thought we were helping patients. But no one told me about the chips. No one showed me the names of those tested. You chose women without families, no one to protect them. You chose me. I felt my whole body tense as if someone was pulling every nerve under my skin tight. Her last words were an accusation, not only toward those behind Ravenwood, but the very system that turned her into a victim the moment she spoke out. The screen switched to another clip without video, only audio. A recording excerpt from a closed-door meeting, the deep male voice now cold and official. Version B07 is no longer controllable. Delete the procedure. Destroy all results. The child will be handled privately. No trace left. I gasped and recoiled from the screen as if I'd touched a live wire. The child. Me. That voice, I realized now, was dear. Landon Pierce. A former colleague of my mother's, the one who signed the psychiatric evaluation forcing her out of Ravenwood and into Raven Hill. No. CEO of a nationally renowned neurotherapy company found in nearly every major hospital across the United States. My entire body fell into a haze of fear and anger. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my skin until almost bleeding. My mother was not just a victim. She was the only one who knew exactly what happened. And I was the living proof of the whole truth they tried so hard to erase. I was version B07. The version that needed to be silenced quietly. Because as long as I existed, their system built over more than 20 years could collapse at any moment. I took off my headphones, closed the laptop, but my ears still rang with the final sounds of the recording. The tapping of a pen on paper and that steady, chilling phrase like an execution order. No trace left. I felt something inside me change forever, as if every cell resisted the shell of normality I'd worn for 18 years. I was no longer the abandoned child in the files. I was the target they hadn't erased yet. And I was alive, which meant I could still speak out. The cafe door opened, a small bell chimed. I jumped, turning around to see a strange man step inside, wearing a raincoat and a hood. I didn't recognize him, but when his eyes glanced at me, my heart pounded faster. No words were spoken, but I clearly sensed I was no longer anonymous. Someone knew I had watched that video. And now time was no longer on my side. Caleb stopped the truck about 1,000 feet from Raven Hill's main gate. It was a narrow road littered with dry leaves, no signposts, no directions, just a tall chain-link fence with security cameras slowly panning. Dusk had fallen. Fog from the distant hills rolled down like a cold veil over the gloomy building hidden in the woods. The only metal sign, welded directly onto the gate, bore faded letters. Raven Hill Center for Advanced Neuropsychiatric Care. Authorized personnel only. Caleb shut off the engine, turned to me, placing his weathered hand on the steering wheel as if weighing something. "We have only one chance," he said, voice low. "The man I contacted is Terry, former head of security here before being reassigned to records. He owes your mother a promise. But if he changes his mind..." "I'll find another way," I interrupted, eyes fixed on the fence. "I made it here. I won't turn back without seeing my mother." Caleb was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I'll wait at the old laundry building behind the complex at 9 p.m. If you don't return, I'll raise the alarm. But just once." I opened the truck door. The night wind hit my face, carrying the scent of cold earth and damp forest. I pulled my coat tight around my neck, tightened my backpack straps against my chest, then stepped into the darkness. Past the fence, Raven Hill appeared like a forgotten nursing home, with tall barred windows and dim yellow light spilling from the second floor. But I knew what I needed wasn't on the ground floor. I circled to the side, walked along tall grass toward a small door close to the ground. The side entrance Caleb said led to the mechanical basement. The motion sensor lit up as I approached, making my heart pound, but the door was unlocked. I pushed gently inside. A narrow, cold, damp hallway stretched before me. The faint light dimmed as if dust covered every surface. The antiseptic smell hit my nose and made me nauseous. Before I could orient myself, a hoarse voice spoke from behind. "You're Monroe's." I turned around. An older man, probably in his 60s, tall and thin, wearing a faded security uniform, stood a few steps away. He had a thick white beard, dark circles under his eyes, but his gaze was sharp and alert. "I'm Aaliyah," I whispered. "I'm Margaret Sanderson's daughter." His facial muscles twitched slightly. Then he looked around quickly and motioned for silence. "Follow me. Keep your voice down." We walked down a long corridor, turned onto a narrow staircase leading to the basement. Below were thick steel doors, each with a tiny frosted glass window. No room numbers, no patient names. Only the sound of machines and faint repetitive noises like the weak breath of something being held against its will. "Zone X used to hold non-interactive patients," Terry said as we walked. "After the 2006 internal lawsuit, it was abandoned. But when Ravenwood shut down, they transferred some sensitive patients here. No paperwork, no receipts. And my mother was one of them?" He didn't answer. He just stopped in front of the last door. I peered through the frosted glass. Inside was a gaunt woman sitting motionless on a cushioned chair by a small window. The ceiling light reflected off her sparse gray hair, her skin pale and almost translucent. But I still recognized her. Though she looked nothing like the old photos, those eyes, that profile was still my mother's. Is she awake? I asked, voice catching. She is. But rarely speaks, Terry replied. They keep her in a semi-conscious state with drugs and mild electrical stimulation through neural navigation devices. I've seen her medical records. They don't call her a patient. They list her as Subject X-19. I clenched my fist. I want in. Terry hesitated a moment, then unlocked the door. The steel groaned open. I stepped inside, my feet nearly numb. Mom, I whispered. She didn't respond. I moved slowly closer, sat beside her chair, and gently touched the back of her hand. Her skin was dry and cold, but still carried faint warmth. She blinked slowly, then turned her head toward me. In that moment there was no time, no severed memories. Only the gaze, and an unnameable bond, connecting me to the woman before me. You're Aaliyah, she whispered, her voice trembling like the wind brushing a window pane. I nodded, tears spilling uncontrollably. No, she struggled to lift a hand, weakly grasping mine. You shouldn't be here. Mom, I need you. I found the video. I know the truth. They can't silence you. I'm still here. She shook her head, breathing ragged. They implanted devices in you too, since you were 5. During anesthesia, fake biopsy, at a clinic in Des Moines. I leaned back, nearly breathless. I vaguely remembered a childhood hospital stay for lymph node infection, and a small scar behind my ear my adoptive parents said was from a drain tube. I never questioned it, but now I understood. I was not just living proof, I was part of the experiment. A test subject. You don't see, you don't feel anything, I stammered. Because it sleeps. But when memories start, it will awaken. My mother's eyes suddenly flashed with fear, as if something pierced her mind. She squeezed my hand tighter. Aaliyah, if they know you're alive, if they know you know, they won't stop. I felt my chest tighten like it was being crushed. I didn't know what to fear more, the people out there or the thing inside my own body. But then I could only hold her. Hold her tight, as if I could cling to something the world had tried to cut away from me for nearly 2 decades. And for the first time in my life I heard my mother cry. Not because she was imprisoned, not because of what she endured, but because of me, the daughter she could not protect. And I knew, from that moment on, I would no longer seek truth only for myself. I would fight to break the chains that bound both of us. Or die trying. I don't remember exactly how we left Raven Hill. Everything felt like a half-waking dream. Doors opening, soft footsteps on cold tile, Terry muttering as he led us through the dark underground hallway with no cameras. My mother whispering my name like it was the last thread tying her to reality. And Caleb's gaze when I helped her into the waiting car in the dark. The look of someone who understood that from that moment, every path would be blocked unless we moved fast and decisively. We drove all night through forests and empty mountain roads, into the desert lands of southern Utah. Caleb had an old friend, a former energy engineer, now living off-grid in a small cabin far from any signal towers. The wooden house sat tucked between rocky cliffs on 3 sides, with the 4th facing a still blue lake. There was no cell phone reception, no GPS signal. Only wind, nighttime insects, and silences so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. My mother was cared for by Caleb with the meticulousness of someone who had seen more than a person should endure. She slept a lot, each sleep a battle between old drugs in her system and the awakening slowly returning. Every time she opened her eyes and looked at me, I felt like I had stepped out of an 18-year-long dream. I started having strange headaches. At first just a mild tension in my temples, then spreading to the back of my neck, sometimes accompanied by a ringing like ocean waves echoing in my ears. One morning, while washing my face, I looked up at the mirror and saw a flash in both pupils. In that brief moment, childhood memories flooded back. A cold white clinic room, harsh lights shining in my eyes, an oxygen mask placed on my face, and a man whispering into my ear, "Just a routine checkup, good girl." I stepped back, trembling, hand against the wall to steady myself. It wasn't imagination. It was memory, suppressed for years, rising slowly like an oil slick on water. I told Caleb. He wasn't surprised, just nodded and quietly pulled out a small, worn device from his backpack. A portable MRI machine used for remote research. It wasn't the most advanced equipment, but enough to see what we needed. Sit still, close your eyes, breathe evenly, he said as I lay on the long wooden bench in the living room, my head resting on a rolled-up blanket pillow. The scanner hummed softly. Caleb focused on the small screen attached to the device. Less than 2 minutes later, he paused, frowning. I sat up. What do you see? Caleb didn't answer immediately. He turned the screen toward me. On the image, amid the blurred cross-sections of my brain, was a tiny bright spot, right near the left hippocampus. It was no bigger than a grain of rice. But in the medical world, no foreign object inside the brain was ever accidental. Is it a tracking device? I asked, though deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. Caleb shook his head. Not just tracking. Could be some kind of behavioral stimulation or memory lock. This technology. I saw preliminary documents at Ravenwood. But I didn't think they'd applied it to children. Until now. I stared at the screen, goosebumps breaking out all over. A cold shiver ran up my spine to the top of my head. That object had been inside me for 13 years, maybe longer. It was there when I learned to read, when I first fell in love, when I sat beside my adoptive parents without ever feeling like I truly belonged. What do I do with it? I asked, voice trembling. Caleb was silent a moment. If removed improperly, it can cause permanent damage. But left inside, it might still be collecting data or worse, waiting to be activated. I clenched my fist. Every cell in my body screamed in rebellion. I couldn't live with that inside me. But I also couldn't wait for it to destroy me. That night, I sat beside my mother, my hand resting on her shoulder. I won't run anymore, I whispered. I will show them Mom isn't crazy and I'm not a test subject. I'll tell the whole world. The next morning, I left the cabin and walked more than 3 miles to the nearest small town, the only place with a weak cell signal. I went into a small family diner, ordered a black coffee, opened the laptop and connected Caleb's hard drive. I accessed the internet through a VPN, created a new email under a fake identity, then sent the entire encrypted folder containing documents, videos, brain scans, and photos of my mother to someone I had followed for years. Simone Carter, an independent journalist who had exposed a medical testing scandal at Riverton Nursing Home hidden by authorities for nearly a decade. I attached a message. I am Aaliyah. I am B07. My mother is Margaret Sanderson. They once implanted devices into homeless women's brains, and into their daughters too. I have evidence. But I can't reveal it alone. If you're who I think you are, help me bring the truth to light. I had no hope. I just knew I had no other choice. But only 2 hours later, Simone replied. The first sentence made me hold my breath. I've been waiting for this message for 15 years. And then I knew I was no longer alone. And this fight had only just begun. I will never forget that morning, when the entire story was no longer a silent secret passed among hidden lives, no longer buried in dusty files or hard drives stashed under beds. That day, my mother's voice, the accusations in the video hidden for nearly 20 years, the image of the device in my brain and Caleb's testimony, all were released at once. Simone Carter called the campaign Uprising Light. She didn't send it to a single media outlet. Instead, she split it into 5 separate encrypted datasets, sending them to an investigative podcast, 2 major newspapers, a patient rights platform, and a community of former healthcare workers fired for speaking out. Each place received only a portion, and they had to combine the pieces to understand the whole. That was the only way to ensure no one could block every stream of information. Less than 10 hours after the first broadcast, a podcast replaying Margaret's screaming in the interrogation room, they implant devices into homeless women. I remember everything. The internet exploded. Hashtag Mantis Project, hashtag B07, hashtag implant chip, hashtag Margaret's daughter. All became trending across every social platform. Video clips, MRI images of my brain, recordings of Landon Pierce saying the child will be handled privately. All were cited so extensively they couldn't be erased from the system. 3 days later, an Illinois state senator called for a federal investigation into illegal neurotherapy programs deployed during the 2000s. The Department of Health and Human Services opened a hotline for complaints from victims or families treated at facilities linked to Ravenwood or Raven Hill. I sat in the wooden house in the valley, eyes glued to the screen. My mother rested behind me. Simone was on the other end of the phone, talking nonstop, guiding me on how to protect original data. I wasn't afraid anymore. I just felt empty. As if after all those years of waiting, when the truth finally appeared in the light, I didn't know what to do with it. Caleb disappeared on the morning of the fourth day. He left a short handwritten note beside the old coffee machine. Don't stay in one place too long. They won't hesitate to start over. I looked for him everywhere. Called the numbers he used, traced signals from his devices, asked old contacts I knew through Simone. But no luck. Caleb vanished as if he never existed. Only what he left behind in records and in my heart remained. A promise he kept until the last moment. 2 days later, Ravenhill burned down. The first news came from a small local Utah station. Fire at former psychiatric treatment center. Cause unknown. The building was officially out of use but reportedly had staff working in the mechanical basement. I sat silently in front of the screen. Simone called immediately after. Do you think that's a coincidence? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The answer was already inside me from the moment I heard the news. The mechanical basement, where my mother was once held, where the nameless patients were brought in and never walked out. I wondered if the unreleased files were still there. Whether Terry was still alive. Or if he had disappeared with the building, erased like a lost part of national memory. That afternoon I sat alone on the porch, watching the sun slowly set behind the mountain range. My mother slept soundly after long fatigue. I heard the wind blow through the pine branches and involuntarily recalled Caleb's last words before parting at Ravenhill. When truth comes out, there is always loss. But some losses give the light a place to enter. I no longer believed in complete justice. I doubted anyone could fully understand what my mother endured. Or what I was carrying in my head. But I knew one thing. From now on, they couldn't call her crazy without anyone to refute it. They couldn't implant devices into children without fearing the day that child would speak out. They could erase, burn, make people like Caleb disappear. But this time the light had arrived. And I was still here. Alive. Remembering. Telling the story. 1 year after the truth was revealed, my life did not return to normal. In fact, from the moment I knew who I was, or rather from the moment I accepted my right to redefine myself, the idea of normal ceased to exist. But I learned to live with that, and more importantly, I learned to live authentically. We moved to a small house on the outskirts of Bar Harbor, Maine. A 2-story gray oak home with a wide porch and windows overlooking pine trees behind the garden. No one here knew who we were, and that was what I needed. A place without surveillance systems, without memories boxed in labs, without heavy footsteps echoing down psychiatric prison corridors. My mother, Margaret, was still there, living, breathing, and occasionally smiling. But the drugs and devices had left their marks. She no longer spoke much. Some days she just stared out the window, clutching a cup of tea as if afraid it might disappear. Her nervous system couldn't fully recover, and her memory flickered like shards of broken glass patched together. But there was one thing she never forgot. Me. When I enter the room every morning and call out, "Mom?" she turns around, her eyes soften, and sometimes she grasps my hand as if holding onto a part of a memory that hasn't faded away. "Are you safe?" she asks on the clearer days. "I'm safe," I always answer. "And I'm still doing what you started." I didn't choose this path out of revenge. I chose it because I couldn't bear the thought of other children growing up with chips in their heads, other women labeled delusional just for speaking out, and people like my mother, silenced by drugs, electric shocks, and forged records. I founded a nonprofit called the Sanderson Truth Project, my way of restoring my mother's name in the public eye. This platform not only offers legal support to victims of medical abuse but also publicly releases previously hidden medical documents. We collaborate with independent journalists, medical reviewers, and even former insiders like Caleb. Though he never reappeared, much of the data he left behind has helped dozens uncover the roots of what they thought were personal illnesses. I hired a team of tech experts to develop an immutable blockchain storage system, uneditable and unerasable. Every memo, research report, and video is encrypted and secured by 3 layers of global distributed protection. Thousands of letters came in, some from direct victims, others from descendants seeking acknowledgement for years lived under the shadow of misdiagnosis, prescriptions that stole their voice, memories, or freedom. Some nights I'd sit reading emails, shaky handwriting full of spelling errors, but so raw and painful I could barely breathe. A mother who sent her son to a behavior adjustment camp after being told he had anger control disorder, only to discover it was an electroshock treatment testing center. A former soldier who lost memories after a neurological rehabilitation program, only to find his nightly dreams were implanted images after treatment. I can't save everyone, but I can help them be heard. Simone became an indispensable partner in the project. She is more than a journalist. She knows the price of truth and constantly reminds me that every power system survives on silence. We organize public discussions, online seminars, and support anonymous reporting. I no longer feel alone in the dark. In June, I was invited to speak at a TEDx event in Boston, the very city I once thought too big for someone like me to exist in. I remember that morning, standing backstage, gripping my notes tightly, but my eyes fixed on a short message from my mom on my phone. "I'm watching. Proud of you." Stage lights hit my face as I stepped out, but I didn't feel blinded. I saw clearly the faces of those seated below, those who were once silenced, hidden, made to believe their voices didn't matter. I began slowly, word by word. My name is Aaliyah Sanderson. I grew up with programmed memories, a body implanted with a device I didn't choose to carry, and a mother called crazy for speaking the truth. I was once known as B07 in an unacknowledged experimental system. They called me a failed mutant. I paused, looking around the silent room, holding its breath. But today I stand here under my own name, unmasked, without codes, without fear. Today I am the truth they cannot control. As applause filled the room, I didn't think of victory. I thought of my mother sitting in a small living room in Maine, before a TV screen, light illuminating a face that had endured too much. I thought of Caleb, no longer by my side but present in every piece of evidence. I thought of the nameless who lived, died, and were forgotten. And I thought, if I can turn this voice into a flame, I will keep it burning. Not to destroy, but to light the way for others, one by one, to step out of the darkness as I did. I don't know where you're hearing this story. Maybe on your way home in a quiet evening, or while wondering if someone out there has ever felt torn from their own life like my mother and me. But if there's something that silences you, makes you pause and think about a woman society once pushed aside, about a girl branded a mutant, please tell me what you think. Do you believe memories are something no one has the right to manipulate? Have you ever felt you had to stay silent because speaking up would turn the world against you? Leave your thoughts below this video. I will read every line, not just because I want to know you heard me, but because I believe truth needs to resonate from one heart to another. If my story brings you something, even just a moment that touches memory or compassion, don't forget to like and subscribe. We have many more stories waiting to be told, from hidden family corners, unseen choices, to quiet struggles to live as oneself. My journey doesn't end here, and maybe one day it will touch yours. Thank you for listening. And if you're still here, maybe you believe like me that light doesn't begin where it's brightest, but with those brave enough to kindle it.